Okay, this week's Sky Cricket podcast comes to you from Dharamshala, which is where I am. I made my way from Delhi up to the mountains, the snow-topped mountains, actually. It's pretty cool and crisp here in Dharamshala. But I know, Nas, I'm not allowed to talk about the weather. How's things with you? Has your mood improved? Has the man flu improved? Have the floods disappeared from Chelmsford?
All of the above, actually. I have improved. My mood has improved. The man flu is nearly gone. I've still got a little bit of a cough. The weather has improved. The sun's out, and Arsenal won 6-0 a couple of nights ago. So I'm in a happy place, as are you. You're in a happy place. We were there for the World Cup. It is a special place to end a special tour.
It is. It's one of the great Test match grounds. You could count them on the fingers of one hand. The most spectacular grounds, couldn't you? Places like, I don't know, Newlands and Old Trafford and places like that. Anyway, England are here. England are here in Durham. We can't do the trek that we did, actually. The Triumph trek is out of bounds at the moment because there's too much snow. So you can't get up to where we got up to, which was that fantastic morning when I dragged you out of bed and up the mountain. And we're recording this on Wednesday. So it's the day before the men's Test match. And the news this morning from here is that 6 of the players had the great thrill of meeting the Dalai Lama, whose residence is in McLeod Gunj, which is just below where our hotel is. If you remember, we walked down the hill to McLeod Gunj, where there's a few bars and restaurants. That's where his residency is. And the players had the great thrill this morning of meeting him. And it's one of those things that you have a privilege of doing, isn't it, on tour, meeting some unbelievable figures. Who stands out from your playing days, Nas?
Royalty, the Queen. I think Gucci introduced me to the Queen at the Oval, maybe Lords, maybe both.
Did you not have to do the 3 cheers for the Queen at Lords?
I don't know if I did. I think I missed that game. I think I had a broken digit. I think either you or the gaffer, Stuart, had to do it. Prince Philip, if you win the county championship, I don't know if you've ever won the county championship, Beth, but you have to go to the palace and meet the royalty. Prince Philip, I met him, and obviously Bex. Me and Bex were like that in the World Cup, weren't we? And when he turned up to Mumbai, we were inseparable. Me, Ravi Shastri, and David Beckham. What about you?
I would say the great thrill of my life was meeting Nelson Mandela, actually, on England's first tour of South Africa post readmission. He came to our very first game in Soweto. I'll never forget it. And we were playing a game in Soweto, and we heard that the great man might be coming. And so the game just stopped. Right in the middle of the first session, the game just stopped, and we all kind of lined up and met him. That was if you remember, the famous meeting. I know you weren't on the tour. I didn't pick you for that one. But Devon Malcolm, when he met Devon and said, "Oh, you're the destroyer," because it was just after Devon had got 9 for the Oval. And then we met him frequently, actually, on that tour. He invited us round to where he lived. I remember getting 6 autobiographies signed by him. So I think if I was to pick one, that would be mine. So that's Wednesday. That's what the players are up to today. This podcast is going out Friday, and we're actually changing tack. We're going to catch up on the end of the Test match, but for this podcast, we're going to talk women's cricket because it's a fantastically interesting space at the moment. Things are changing rapidly and markedly, both domestically at ECB level and internationally. The WPL is on as we speak, the second leg of that in Delhi as we speak right now. And to get a sense of how quickly things are changing, I'm delighted to say that Beth Barrett-Wild, who's in charge of the domestic professional game for the women for the ECB, she's joining us. Beth, welcome. Good to see you.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
And lots of exciting things going on, obviously. But I wanted to start with Shabmin Ismail, actually, who on Tuesday broke the 80 miles an hour speed barrier, or the 130 kilometers an hour, which has been a kind of one of those barriers that everybody's been waiting for one of the women's bowlers to break, and it finally happened.
Yeah, look, I saw that. I actually had to Google how fast 130 kilometers an hour was in miles an hour, just so that I could get that context. But yeah, look, brilliant. I think she's been on the cusp of that for a little while now. We know what a fiery character she is. I actually had to think about what would that be like to face myself. And I think it just demonstrates that level of professionalism now that's coming through the women's game, and the fact that they're spending that much more time on task and they're training, etc. And it's enabling them to really to push those boundaries. And I know actually how thrilled Charlotte Edwards was to pick up Shabnim in the auction for the WPL this time around. So yeah, she's certainly paying that back now.
I mean, it's the obvious point, isn't it, that because professionalism is relatively new, say, compared to the men's game, the level of progress is going to be absolutely rapid from here on in as the cricketers are given more time and more energy to prepare and practice properly. We're going to see those rapid improvements.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that excites me most actually about where we are right now is that level of young player coming through. And that talents that we're now able to acquire and then actually support them through professional structures to enable them to train and full time. And I think, Shabnim, hopefully she'll be the first of many. And she's set that bar now, but I'm sure it'll be broken again in the not too distant future.
I saw your tweet the other day about the 100 draft. You're thrilled with the world-class talent, as you put it, that is in that draft and will be coming to England this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we sort of, winding back the years and sort of closed my eyes and thought about the list that I'd like to see competing in the women's competition, it very much was that ability to attract the top overseas players from Australia and India in particular. And I think seeing the likes of Ash Gardner in that mix and Meg Lanning, hopefully we'll get Meg Lanning into the mix. She's, sort of not quite got over the line in terms of domestic cricket in this country before. So seeing those players coming through along with all the Indian talent and sort of New Zealand and the Saffers as well, it's just really exciting. I think if you look at the retained list combined with that draft list, it is really like all of the world-class players. And I think that's just testament to how they see the 100 now as, is that world-class competition that they want to compete in, but also just all the hard work that's gone on behind the scenes to create that opportunity in the last 3 years so that they're coming back in year 4.
And the salaries have gone up as well for the women under. I think it's 41% across the board. The top band has gone up to 50K. Some would say about time, but that does attract better cricketers, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of the women's salaries, we have had rapid acceleration in that from year 1. I think if you look back to year 1, the top earning women's band was 15K. So to get that up to 50K in 4 years is really positive. Clearly still work to do there. But I think what was really important in terms of that top band in particular was making sure that it was attractive to those top overseas players. And I think, I feel really sort of positive and vindicated, I guess, that we've been able to attract the likes of Ash Gardner and Meg and co, who haven't been before with that top bands now. It's serious cash, 50K for a 4-week period. So, we're definitely going in the right direction there.
Can we get into the weeds of the restructuring of domestic cricket, which is always one of those phrases?
Not the weeds, it's the green
the green shoots. When you say structure of domestic cricket, probably immediately thousands of people will leave this podcast. It is interesting.
We don't have thousands of them, to be honest, to leave.
It is interesting because it's the second major restructuring now in 5 years. You're moving away from a regional structure and moving the top tier, the full-time professional teams back towards the county. Obviously, given your position, you've been absolutely at the heart of the discussions and the decision making. Maybe just for people watching and listening who don't know what the changes will be scheduled for 2025, just explain them in as clear a fashion as you can.
I'll try not to get dragged into the weeds. So look, we're doing two big changes for 2025. So as you've touched on there, we're looking to evolve the ownership and the governance and the finance model of our 8 women's professional teams. So at the moment, domestic professional cricket for the women in this country is delivered through a regional model. So we've got our 8 women's regional teams. Those teams are wholly owned essentially by the ECB, and they're delivered on our behalf by consortiums, I suppose, of first-class counties. So an example being the Western Storm, which is a conglomerate of Somerset, Gloucestershire and Glamorgan. And look, that structure was launched back in 2020 through a very sort of clear performance-based lens. Like, we wanted to professionalise women's cricket on the field as quickly as possible. And the most linear way of doing that at that point was to create a regional structure and to get it up and running, basically. And I think it's been hugely successful. I think we're really starting to see the development of the players coming through the regional model. And, we're seeing the likes of Danny Gibson going from regional cricket straight into an England shirt and performing in front of 20,000 people at Lord's during the Ashes last summer. So it's done a really brilliant job. But I think in terms of how we look to take women's cricket to the next level, there is a recognition that we perhaps need to evolve that structure, and in particular the ownership of those 8 teams. So we are in the middle of a tender process. So we are running a tender process to identify 8 single first-class counties or MCC. So it's open to all of the 18 first-class counties and MCC to bid to essentially apply to become a Tier 1 status women's professional team from 2025. So we're in the middle of that at the moment. Some really good conversations that I've had with first-class county chief executives. I think we've got lots of interest. So I'm excited to see those bids come through. So the closing date for that is next Monday. So that's Monday, the 11th of March. And then they will be assessed by an independent panel. Well, it's a hybrid panel, actually. We've got some ECB executives, some ECB board members, and some independent panel members making those decisions. So that will be our Tier 1. So we'll have our 8 women's professional teams, which will be wholly owned and operated and governed by individual first-class counties or MCC. So that's the shift there. And I think that will really help to drive accountability for those teams in particular, along with other benefits. And then the second point that we're looking to do is we're looking to expand our domestic playing pyramid. So I think this is perhaps the bit that's maybe flown under the radar a little bit amongst all the excitement around the Tier 1 stuff. Is that we're looking to introduce a Tier 2 and a Tier 3 underneath that. So that will really drive depth into our playing structure, so our women's domestic structure. So that Tier 2 will have between 10 to 14 teams. The number of teams TBC, because we're going to run another expedited process to identify the composition of that. That'll be open to the remaining first-class counties who aren't awarded Tier 1 status, and also national counties, which I think is quite exciting to give them the opportunity to compete at that Tier 2 level. And then Tier 3 underneath that, which in all likelihood will be a mix of national counties. But again, just providing real structure and capacity and depth to the women's game, which perhaps at the moment, through just the regional model, which is quite a flat 8-team structure, we don't have quite to that extent. So look, there's lots going on there. I'm not sure I simplified it or made it sound more complicated, but it is very exciting. And I think for both the women's game, and this is something I've been really keen to stress, like I very much see this as being a growth plan for cricket more holistically. So we talk a lot about sort of transforming the women's game and all this transformational impact that we've had in women's cricket. I think this next phase of growth very much is about evolving the whole game together. And sort of, to do that is bringing the men's and the women's games at a professional sort of domestic level anyway, a lot closer together.
And this may not fall under your remit, but for all the good work you do, and the 100 does, and the ECB does, grassroots women's and girls cricket needs to be looked after. It's almost a consequence of all these girls turning up watching the 100, women, mums, families, that they want to play more cricket. Does that fall under your remit as well, that you're doing such a good job, but schools don't play that much, clubs, facilities, grounds people, money, coaches, female coaches. Do you keep an eye on that as well? Because all these good things have consequences down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not my direct responsibility, but I'm still very much involved in a lot of work that's going on there. I think you're absolutely right with the kind of the exciting high profile stuff. I think especially through the 100 and knowing how many young girls in particular come through to watch those matches, we need to make sure that we have capacity through our grassroots to accommodate that growth. And I think it's something that we're working very hard on actually in terms of the number of women and girls, the number of cricket clubs that offer women and girls cricket moving forward. It's got brilliant partnership with Metro Bank in particular in that space. So they're our champion partner for women and girls cricket. And I know they've got some exciting plans this summer and big ambitions actually in that recreational club space in particular. But yeah, it's kind of one of those things, isn't it? We've focused very hard at the top and grown the profile and sort of really invested heavily into professionalizing the sport to create that shop window, I suppose. But the bit that we definitely need to focus on now is making sure that we've got the foundations underneath that.
Can I ask about the change that you've made? Because the biggest complaint I hear across the game generally, actually, from supporters is that they get very frustrated that every year the structure and the schedule seems to change, whether it's a different tournament, a different competition, a different format. And now, 5 years after, regional cricket has become established, really, and people have got used to the idea, it's all change again. Is there a danger that, there can be too much change, or did you just feel that this was absolutely essential for the next stage?
Yeah, look, and it's something we have thought a lot about. I think it has been a relatively short period of time since we launched the regional model in 2020. But I think the landscape has fundamentally shifted actually for women's cricket in that time. I think if you wind back to where we were in 2020, so we hadn't had the Women's T20 World Cup at the MCG and that massive moment of 80,000 people turning up to watch that event. We hadn't launched the 100 and sort of recognising that enormous audience opportunity that existed. I think actually for women's sport more generally, actually, we hadn't had the Women's Euros and sort of the effects that has had and where women's sport sits now. So I think the landscape for women's sport has shifted enormously. So we need to make sure that we're presenting our domestic game in a way that fans really can engage with and at scale. I think that's one of the big things that we've learned definitely through the 100 and actually through our aligned England men's and England women's campaigns that we look to approach those with now. So the Ashes to Ashes campaign, for example, is how we can use existing scale in the men's game and transition that across into the women's game to accelerate fan growth there. But I think also just in terms of sort of, the potential of the women's game, I think it is moving so quickly. It's almost outgrown the sort of the structures of the regional model. So we know that there are some challenges there around governance and accountability because we don't have that single point of ownership for those women's teams. I think there's an opportunity around, that growing opportunity around market forces for women's cricket that we're not quite leaning into enough at the moment, which we can do a lot more effectively through a single first-class county model. So look, I think there's a few things. And I think actually the other point being we definitely have an ambition for cricket to become the most inclusive sport in the UK. And I think one of the big assets actually that the game has is that we can present men's and women's, girls and boys cricket the same way at every single touch point. So we have All Stars and Dynamos in the rec game for girls and boys. We've got England men, England women. We've got the 100 men, the 100 women. The single point of difference in terms of how we present and deliver cricket at the moment is actually in that domestic game space. So the ability to bring those two things a little bit more closely together, I think, is really powerful around our ambition to become the UK's most inclusive sport.
And can I ask about money? All these things come back to money in the end. And of course, how sustainable a game is a difficult question. County cricket would be of its own a loss-making thing in the men's game. But of course, the whole game is funded at the moment, at least, essentially by England men's Test cricket. So therefore, they need the players from the counties. And therefore, that argument about sustainability is a complex one. And what about the finances of this then? The counties are under strain, many of them. Obviously, they're taking on an extra responsibility here. How will the finances work initially? And at what point do you think, having thought about the next few years, at what point do you hope that the game becomes sustainable, if indeed it does?
Yeah, look, I think it's similar in terms of sort of where future revenue streams will come in for the women's game as it is for the men's game. I think right now, England women is probably that is the product, for want of a better word, that will help to generate and to grow that commerciality within women's cricket. And I think the domestic structure serves the same purpose actually for the women as it does for the men. It is that engine room to drive those revenues upstream. So we need to make sure that we are producing those players to perform and sort of, then start to commercialising the women's team, and then that will filter down. In terms of sort of, how the finance is going to work. So we've committed, so the ECB is committed to invest in a minimum of £1.3 million into each of the 8 women's professional teams in that tier 1. And that is going to go up a little bit. Can't give you any exclusives today, I'm afraid, but we've also committed to an additional £4 to £5 million that's going to be invested across the whole pyramid on an annual basis through the duration of this strategic period, which is 25 to 28. So ECB is still very much seed funding, I suppose, these teams. We're committed to doing that and to making sure that that is ring-fenced funding into professionalising the women's game. But I think there's a huge opportunity actually for the first-class counties. Like I said, I think this is an opportunity for them to be able to present their clubs in a different way to potential commercial brand partners. So there's a lot of research that's been released by the likes of Deloitte now around sort of the future of women's sports. I think they've identified that it's going to be a £1 billion industry in 2024, which is significantly higher than how they projected that to be a few years ago. But what's interesting about that is where the money is coming from. So in men's sport, traditionally, the significant proportion of revenue comes from broadcast rights. I think what we're finding in women's sport, actually, it's more, it leans much more heavily towards commercial partnerships and brand partnerships. And I think that's something that's really important in terms of how this is really a growth plan for cricket, is again, that ability to co-present a men's and a women's team together is critical. And in fact, it's a hygiene factor, I think, moving forwards in terms of sports and going to brands to do that. So we very much see, money coming online for the FCCs through at a local level through those brand partnerships. But how we then, utilise that structure to drive talent through the pathways into the England women's team to create the most successful international women's team and really sort of drive the commercial value of the broadcast rights there is also very important. So look, it is, it's a complicated space, I suppose. It's moving very quickly. I don't think we're putting a timeline on when we're like, right, and in, I don't know, 2030, whatever, women's cricket will break even tick. I think it is a moving feast, so to speak. But we feel like we are now creating the conditions. And I think in particular, the way that England women, the 100 and the domestic structure will work moving forwards, we're creating a holistic approach to give as best a chance as possible for us to start really generating those commercial revenues in a really meaningful and incremental way. And I think that's really important, actually, incremental growth. We're setting ourselves up hopefully for success in that space.
Can I just pick you up or ask you on a couple of things you've mentioned there, the finances and the growth? If I start finances, there's a lot going on behind the scenes with the ECB about the 100 and the direction of the 100 and private equity and outside investment. Are the women's sides and the women's franchises front and centre of those discussions and not been looked over? Because let's be honest, it's been a massive part, if not the most important part of the 100, is what's happened. I've spoken to Danni a couple of days ago, Danni Wyatt, and she said it's the best thing that's happened, the 100 women's side. So are they front and centre? And the second thing is, you mentioned growth there of women's sport in general. I noticed that the last couple of Emirates games for the WSL women's, Arsenal, Manchester United a couple of weeks ago, over 60,000, and the growth of women's football. Do you see that as a threat, or do you see that as something that enables just women's sport to keep rolling forward?
Yeah, so taking the 100 question first, look, I think it's been well reported on some of the conversations that are going on around the growth plans for the 100 and the potential for private investment to come into those eight teams. And look, I'm really confident, comfortable and happy that the women's teams and the women's element of the 100 is very much a part of that conversation. I think it's actually what makes the competition unique in terms of that go-to-market proposition and the fact that it has got a world-class men's and women's competition side by side is really positive, and I think that's been well received. And I'm confident that that is very much a part of the conversation. So that's in a good space. I think in terms of the wider women's sport piece, look, I think it's a really good question, and I grapple with this all the time because there's the one sort of train of thought which is around a rising tide lifts all boats, and that we can really rip off the halo effect. And I think we have seen that. I think off the back of the women's Euros in particular in 2022 and how the 100 was able to play out of that. Like I think and other sort of England women, we've definitely seen an interest or a pickup in interest around women's cricket. And I think actually the more that we can have high profile women's sport in the public eye and in those big high profile slots, so that it's just normalizing women playing sport on that big stage, the better. So that then it's not a double take when they see a professional women's cricket match. It's just completely part of sort of culture and society, and it's just totally normalized. I think that's very positive. On the flip side, I think there is an element that we're going to be in competition for eyeballs now. I think it is one of those things. It's how, I guess, how the space is moving from perhaps like quite a harmonious sort of environment to one of having that competitive tension and going after the same audience, and how those two things will continue to move going forward. So look, I think it's really interesting, but I think where we are with cricket, like I look at football all the time in terms of what they are doing and how we can keep up. And I think at the moment we're very much running in the slipstream, and I think that's really positive. And I think as long as we can sort of stay in that slipstream, for the foreseeable future, we've got real potential there. But I think the big point for me right now is that normalizing of perception around women playing high profile professional sport on the big stage, and it just becoming habitual. I think that's one of the big things as well. I think, how do we flip, when we go back to the commercial conversation, how do we flip from being these, big one-off events into habits that people just go and watch and consume women's sports? We're on that journey. And I think just going back to the regional structure and the evolution of that into one which is much more closely aligned with the first-class county structure, I think that's part of that journey, actually. It's part of that, just becoming habit, becoming culturally relevant, and having, that kind of essence attached to it.
You mentioned competition there. If I broaden it out a little bit, and I know this is not your remit because your remit is domestic professional cricket, but in terms of competition, when the WPL has been ongoing and England's tour of New Zealand, I noted that one of the issues that is causing great angst in the men's game suddenly cropped up around about player availability, players who are under contract and their availability. I guess it's going to be less of a problem in the women's game just because there are fewer test matches and therefore a much bigger chunk of time is available. And you wouldn't imagine there will be the kind of crossovers that we see there. But is that a worry? And B, do you have any views on whether those England players should be playing for England or in the WPL?
I might not be quite too direct in my answer to the second part of that. I think, look, in terms of where the women's game is right now, it is moving incredibly quickly. And I think we have an opportunity, but the opportunity is now. And we need to make some really clear, firm decisions as a collective across the ICC, the BCCI, Cricket Australia, the ECB, about how we work together to create a schedule, an annual schedule, which allows everything to fit together in a really cohesive and additive way so that we're not encroaching. So I think clear windows for the big three domestic women's competitions as they are at the moment. So the WPL, the 100 and the WBBL, I think that's really important that we plug those in. And then therefore identifying how then the FTP and international cricket can coexist and not just coexist, like how the everything can work better together, I think is really important. So I think we're in a really interesting moment, actually, because we're going to have to get hold of it now. Because as you sort of alluded to there, we've got a situation where England will be playing. I think it's the three IT20s at the start of that tour without some of their top talent, which is unfortunate. And I think there's various reasons behind that. But what we have an opportunity now is to make sure that doesn't happen again, and how we therefore work as a collaborative group is going to be really important. And I think what's really positive about that. So I know Richard Gould, our chief executive, so he's heading out to India in the next few days to watch the last men's test out there. And I know that he'll have a series of meetings with the BCCI lined up. And women's cricket is very much a part of those conversations now. So I'm in regular sort of contact with Richard about various elements of it. Really sort of positive that we've managed to confirm that the Indian women will have NOCs to play in the 100 again this year, which is really, really great. So yeah, I think it is moving quickly. We need to make sure that we get hold of it. And I think we have an opportunity to create a really exciting calendar that doesn't cannibalize itself, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that completely. Effectively, you are at where the men's game was in 2008 when the IPL came along. And the great criticism of the men's administrators is that they've just let the market forces run away with it without giving any thought to the coherence of a structure and a schedule. And I think it will be easier in the women's game because of the lack of test cricket compared to the men's. But I think to grasp that nettle straight away and make a considered and coherent schedule is really important. I'm conscious that we've had you for 25 minutes. Nass, anything else before we let Beth go?
No, I don't think so, Beth. Just more test cricket. I've mentioned their lack of test cricket. Would you like to see more test cricket or not?
Oh, that's a big question, Nasser Hussain. I think women's test cricket, look, it's really interesting. I know Meg Lanning's been on record recently saying that a decision needs to be made as to whether it's all in or whether actually it's something that, you do it properly or you don't do it at all, basically. And I think for women's test cricket to be successful, you need to have a market that wants to watch it. So there needs to be an audience that really wants to engage with it. But more importantly, perhaps there needs to be domestic infrastructures within those nations playing it that can support it properly. And enable those players to train and prepare properly for it. And I think realistically at the moment, if you look at where women's cricket is, you've probably got 3 in England, Australia and India that can support those 2 objectives realistically. So I think it's a really interesting one. I think right now, from my perspective, we need to look at the really big growth opportunities. And I think those really big growth opportunities do revolve around the shorter formats because they are the ones that, we can see we can really throw open doors to engage that bigger and wider audience. So would I have loved there to be more Test cricket when I was growing up? Absolutely. As a kind of slightly very technically correct, but a top order batter that perhaps the white ball game wasn't ever my calling. I would have loved to have had more Test cricket.
Me and you both, Beth, I'm afraid to say.
You were my hero growing up. Like you are.
Come on, Beth.
Atherton.
Seriously?
More.
Me and you, Essex. We got our pictures up in Essex, haven't we? Me and you, crikey, Beth. Come on.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for joining. It must be such a fantastically interesting time and an interesting job you've got right now because, you've talked about. You mentioned the word growth. It's a growth project for the sport. And of course, those are the most fascinating times for any business, any organization, any sport when you're at the start of a rapidly evolving journey. So it's a very important position you've got and a fantastically interesting one. And we wish you well for the changes that you're at the heart of. And I hope that all the counties come in with good bids and the thing gets off the ground well and quickly. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the summer anyway, no doubt.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Take care. Cheers.
Well, I think you got a sense there, Nasser, of what an interesting time it is to be in charge of the domestic professional game because things are changing so markedly and so quickly. And I thought Beth spoke brilliantly there, and clearly to have somebody of her caliber and ability making decisions and right at the heart of it is a good thing.
It is. She's a very impressive lady, isn't she? I mean, apart from having you as a hero growing up, she's an Essex girl. She's a Chelmsford girl. We will never have her on our podcast again, but she is hugely impressive. And what a time to be in charge. The 100 has been fabulous for the women's game. And just generally, as she spoke about there, women's sport is going through the roof. So impressive lady and really, really important times in girls' cricket, women's cricket here in England and around the world.
Yeah, and she referenced the WPL, which is ongoing as we're speaking now. And I know you've had your eye on that. And a few days ago, you caught up with Danni Wyatt.
Danni, thanks for joining us. You arrived in Delhi just now for the second half of the WPL. What have you made so far of the first half of the WPL?
Yeah, I've been really impressed. The crowds have been absolutely unbelievable, and just the whole buzz around the WPL is just unreal. Everyone's really looking after me, and obviously it's been quite frustrating not playing, but I'm just gonna try and enjoy the experience. And I'm out here training outdoors in the heat in subcontinent conditions, playing with and against some of the best players. So really enjoying the experience.
Someone once said to me, T20 cricket needs great players, great pitches and great weather. Chinnaswamy, Bengaluru seem to have all of that. The atmosphere there and the pitch and everything about that venue is perfect for WPL cricket, it seemed.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, the girls were saying that it's just so nice to bat on. It's so flat. And the crowd just bring that buzz. Like, even just sat there watching, it's really quality to watch.
You were there the other night. Smriti played absolutely brilliantly. It was Mandana Mania in Bengaluru. Your Southern Brave opening bat. How is she coping with all the adulation she's getting around India?
Yeah, we had a good catch up the other night. She's really enjoying it. Obviously, she struggled a bit last season. I think she had a lot of weight on her shoulders with captaincy, a lot of pressure. And she's just really enjoying it. She's properly laid back, more laid back than myself. So, she seems in a good place. And yeah, we didn't want her to get going last night, but she did. And she's always a joy to watch.
What's she like as a person? You say she's laid back. Does she get stressed about her game? Does she get stressed like her fame around India has gone through the roof? So is that something you think she'll cope with okay?
I think she's used to it now. I saw Kate Cross as well because she's with the RCB, and she said there's a lot of police and security with her all the time. Yeah, she is a very chilled, laid-back character to bat with. We literally don't speak. It's so nice. Just play our shots. I think she does get a little bit nervous. I think she'll lie if she said she didn't. I think, we all get a bit nervous, don't we? But
tell me how you haven't got a game. I know there's some serious overseas players in your team. Elisa Healy, Grace Harris, Talia McGrath, Sophie Eccleston, Chamari Atapatu, and you have to get 4 out of 6. The other 5 have played. Danni Wyatt hasn't. How comes? You've got an England coach there as well.
I know. I mean, I kind of knew, coming into this, that it might be the case. You've got to think of the balance of the team, and it has been a bit weird not playing, but I've also really enjoyed the experience, and I'm still getting my training in and being around some of the best players in the world. So I've just got to try and keep staying positive as I normally do, and if I get my chance, then great. We've got 3 group games left here in Delhi, so we've got 2 back-to-back games as well, and I think we play our last one on the 11th. So who knows? Fingers crossed. If I get the chance, great. Well, let's see what happens.
Discuss the changes in batting, in particular in the women's game. When you first started, it was a lot about touch and timing. Is there more power coming to the game now, from what you've seen?
Yeah, I'd say so. Don't know if you saw Elise Perry break the window of that car last night.
Isn't that a basic error? Any club cricketer will tell you, don't park your car between long on and deep mid-wicket.
I did think that. I was like, why would you put that car there? But yeah, power hitting. I think, the more professional cricketers there are, the more the power hitting is going to go up, because obviously people are going to be in the gym, working on their fitness, getting stronger. Like when I train tomorrow, I'll be doing range hitting, trying to hit sixes. I'm not a big girl myself. It's all about timing as well. A lot of people come up to me and they can't believe how hard I hit the ball, considering how little I am.
You're in obviously India now. Michael Atherton, we had Kate Cross on a month or so ago, maybe a bit longer, and he wasn't as worried about the impact of the WPL on women's cricket and franchise cricket on women's cricket as the IPL have had on men's cricket. It's well documented, the issues in men's cricket. Do you agree? Because with England players and your tour of New Zealand, it has affected you, hasn't it?
ECB sat down with us all individually and worked out, what was best for us. And we're all in different situations. Like for me, this is my first experience of an IPL, and I was delighted to get the bid and get picked up. And I did think I could go out here and not play a game or play the odd game. But I thought just being here with a World Cup in Bangladesh coming up, being here training in these conditions, it's going to happen more often now, these clashes. There's so many different franchise tournaments coming up around the world, and I'm obviously really looking forward to going out to New Zealand to play for England. I always want to play for England, and I think there will be more clashes going forward.
Do you think there should be a window then for the WPL that there are no clashes? Because then the Big Bash might say that, the 100 might say that.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's going to be probably more, the more cricket there is in women's cricket now, there's going to be even more. So if there was a specific window, that would be ideal. So let's see what happens.
Talking to the 100, I notice you've been retained by the Southern Brave after your player of the match performance in the final. Smriti has just announced that she's putting her name in the hat. Will Southern Brave go for that right to match card with her or not?
I hope so, because I love batting with her. Fingers crossed. Yeah, I love playing in the 100, and I love everyone at Southern Brave, and hopefully we can lift that trophy again this time around. Everything about the 100 is just amazing, and everyone loves playing in it. Everybody loves watching it. And if we can get Smritty back, that would be even better.
And the other one that's put her name in is Meg Lanning. How good is it to see her back, happy, playing cricket and playing so well?
Oh, I saw her the other night. She just seemed so happy. It was great to see. And I think she's one of the best batters in the world. I was lucky enough to play with her years ago now when I played for Victoria. I feel old. And just the way she goes about her business, like she's just quality and is really cool to bat with her as well. She just gets her head down, picks her bowlers, never misses out on her strength. Like she's so strong through point and cover. Like she'll literally pierce any gaps before. Like she's a very smart cricketer. And yeah, it's going to be exciting to see where she ends up in the 100.
You say you're very old. You're 32. Do you look back and think, I'm so pleased I played in different eras? I mean, some of the stuff you'd have had to go through growing up, playing in boys' teams and all the problems that caused. Or are you someone that thinks, well, you know, my career could be ending when all the money and all the finances are coming in? How do you?
I've been lucky enough because I started my career at the MCC Young Cricketers. So I've been lucky that I've always had some money. I've always been a professional cricketer and being paid for what I was doing. But yeah, as you say, the money's going up and up, and we do have a laugh with the youngsters. I'm like, you're so lucky. I didn't have any of this when I was your age. But yeah, that's the way it goes, isn't it? It's the same with football, every women's sport. Women's sport's just growing, which is great to see. And yeah, hopefully I'll stay around for a few more years.
Well, at the end of this year, it's an important time for you. You're getting married. Many congratulations. And
Thank
then
you.
you've got, I don't know which order it's in, which comes first, the wedding and the T20 World Cup. But you go off to Bangladesh for the T20 World Cup. How are England positioned for that?
Yeah, I get married in August, straight after the 100. And then we've got a series against Ireland, and then we go to Bangladesh for the World T20. And I've never won a World T20, so it's about time that we did. And I think we're set really well. Obviously, we've got a few girls out here. And yeah, I've just got a really good feeling about this one. I think we performed really well in the summer against the Aussies in the Ashes, and that's given us real massive confidence going forwards. We beat India in December. So we've beaten two quality sides there. So obviously the conditions are going to be slightly different in Bangladesh. I've heard the pitches are going to be slow and rag a lot. So yeah, everyone's just got the mind on that and working towards that.
I know you've not played yet. By the time this podcast goes out, you may well have had a game. Have you enjoyed India? Do you love India? Away from the cricket, how much do you enjoy it? Yeah,
I really love coming here. I think this is my 10th time to India, and whenever I see we've got a tour in the schedule to India, I'm buzzing. My family love coming here as well, and everyone's just so welcoming and lovely, and the food is unreal. The cricket is quality here. Like the fans are just so passionate and loud, and yeah, it's like no other place in the world playing cricket over here. Enjoy Delhi and tell John Lewis to pick you. 2 T20 international 100s, get you in the side. Yeah, I will do. I'll give him a text now.
Bit of a frustrating time for Danni, who's been on the sidelines at the start of that tournament, but great for her to be involved after not attracting a bid last year when she was very vocal about the disappointment of that. You've been watching it, Nasser. Who's your fancy for the tournament?
Yeah, I have been watching it, and probably the two sides that got to the final last year. Mumbai Indians look a very strong squad again, coached by Charlotte Edwards. She's a serial winner, isn't she? She's won with Southern Brave. She obviously won it with the Mumbai Indians. But looking at that Delhi side, this is not deep insight, by the way. Delhi are top and playing really well.
What are you the big bucks for?
But you've got Meg Lanning and Shafali Verma at the top of the order. Touch and power. You've got Marizan Kapp. You've got Alice Capsey. Jemima Rodriguez played brilliantly yesterday. So I fancy Delhi. They look a really top side.
And we're at the end of a podcast that's focused on the women's game. How's your daughter going? Because she was very interested in the game. Is that right? Or has the interest rather dwindled away? And if so, why?
I wouldn't say very interested, but she was lucky enough to go to a school that played cricket and a club in Hutton Cricket Club where Joel plays. You know my boys very well. Both my boys play there. So she went to watch, and then their girls cricket. And that's what my question to Beth was about, was for everything that's happening at the top, make sure underneath you have the setup to be able to cope with it at Grassroots. And Hutton Cricket Club have a fabulous setup there. It's that sort of period when you go from being a girl into a woman, and A-levels and length of games. I always worry about that, 40, 50 over games when you've been at school all weekend. And she just bowls 5 overs. It becomes a very long day. And I think if it had sort of stayed 20 over cricket or 100 ball cricket, she may have stuck with it, but the length of the game put her off. Alana never really got into it at all. I mean, Josh has been a superstar, but Alana never got into it, Af.
No, my daughter, not interested. Partly, I think, just because it was her brother's thing, and wanted to carve out her own niche and her own identity. So netball and lacrosse have been her games. But very funny last year, because she'd never shown any interest, of course. And I did say to her last year, Josh was playing in a blast game at Lords, and it was a beautiful summer's evening. Her exams had just finished. Middlesex were playing Kent. So I said, let's go down and watch your brother play. And so we went, and it was lovely. There were, 12, 15,000 on a lovely evening. And she turned to me at the end of the night and said, why didn't you tell me cricket was such a good game? As if it's my fault that, she's never shown any interest. But no, I'm hoping that she'll, get along to see the odd game. But I think I did take her to another game at our local club, and the crowd wasn't quite so good, and it wasn't quite so lively, and not quite the sense of atmosphere. So a sense of occasion, I think, for somebody who's not involved in the game, doesn't play the game, doesn't know the game, I think the sense of occasion is really important. So I'm hoping I might drag her along. Well,
that's what you get definitely in the 100, the women's, and that's why the families absolutely love that sort of spectacle. And definitely in Bengaluru, in the Chinnaswamy, that you felt for the WPL, that was a real sense of occasion. So I think you're spot on there.
Right. So we will catch up at the end of this test match, which is going to end my lengthy stay in India. Catch you at the end of it.